My name is Michael Goldberg, and I'm the executive director of our Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship. I was actually just chatting before with Vincent about Veale. Many of you may be hearing about the Veale Institute for the first time. We are relatively new. We actually started on an interim basis under the leadership of our colleague who's on Todd Schwarzinger, who's our chief commercialization officer, and I became the executive director in January. We report in through the provost office, so we work across our campus. I'm still a Weatherhead professor, so I'm sitting in my office here, and we have been working in partnership with our friends at Tech Transfer, our friends in arts and sciences like Glenn, to really bring in external connectivity to folks in the community. And Al Green is a great example who'll be moderating today's panel. So Al is the former CEO of Kent Displays, has been working with us almost since we started at the beginning of this year as an EIR, but playing even a broader role in engaging with Glenn and others on campus in sort of a scouting activity. And it was Al's suggestion for today's panel to really give an opportunity for some of our leading faculty that have been involved in the commercialization process to share. I know we have a bunch of folks, some of whom I know and faces I know, and others who are meeting for the first time that are engaged and leaders on our campus in doing this work. So we're thrilled to have you here. We do have a bunch of other programming that we're doing at Veale. At the very end, I'll come back on and do a little promo for some other activity. But with that, let me turn it over to Al, who's going to run the show today.
Great, thanks. I guess the one thing just for blocking and tackling, what I'd ask is if you go on mute just with a bunch of people, so we can avoid any feedback issues. And then when you're talking, just take yourself off mute. So much appreciated. It's very informal discussion and informal agenda, but let me go through just very quickly what the agenda is going to be. The first thing is I'm going to start out by giving a little bit of just background around what was some of the drivers behind this panel. The second, then I'm going to hand it over to the distinguished panelists to talk about just as a brief intro of their what, where they are in the university and so on and so forth. So we'll do a brief intro. So I'll ask that to be fairly quick. And then we're going to go back around with the panel and talk a little bit more extensively, the panelists about their commercialization activities and some of their experiences. And it'll mixed into that will be a Q&A. Okay, so I like to have questions as we go, and I will try to monitor. But if Doug can also help me to monitor the feed, so please feel free to enter questions in the chat and all that kind of stuff. Again, it'll be very informal. What I want to make sure that we do have one other discussion, which I think Vincent had just mentioned. I haven't met you before, Vincent, but welcome and hello. If they're for faculty that are interested in technology commercialization and seeing their technology commercialized, what they would find as most helpful as services that we at Veale can provide and so on and so forth. So that's a brief overview of the agenda. So going back just to the beginning to talk about what was really the purpose behind this. So I've been in this ecosystem, this space for a long time. As was mentioned before, I was the CEO of Kent Displays for about 12 years, where I took an existing company that was a few million in revenue and took it to a much larger size. And I left after 12 years, and I have a consulting practice right now. But one of the things that I was trying to uncover was, I started asking the question, is there a menu, if you will, of, given an entrepreneur, a faculty member or a graduate student, and so their technology is here. Okay, so it's at this point, and typically the here is it's reaching the tail ends of where the traditional federal funding that most faculty are aware of at tier 1 universities, where that's starting to complete, but they have not reached a minimum viable product. And so this is a traditional valley of death before it's ready for some sort of angel investment. What do the faculty members do at that point? I mean, and when I started trying to ask that question, I figured you could go somewhere and it'd be nicely written down, and we'll hear, TRL level this, this is where you look. This is where you look if you're at that level. This is where you look, and it just doesn't exist. And what I found was that as I talked to a number of different faculty at the university, this and other universities, is that it was not so straightforward, but there were a collection of faculty members who had navigated this this valley of death, what I would say, successfully. The thought was that, okay, so we don't have that menu. We should probably strive to develop something like that. But in the interim, it would be good to hear from people that have navigated, specifically faculty members, to hear some of their learnings. And that's what's really behind this, the panel that we have today. So, okay, so that's again what's behind some background. So why don't I segue into the panelists? So if the panelists could just briefly raise their hands, so people can know who they are. So Reshmi and Umut and Bob Brown, and we're going to have probably a series of these. This panel is meant to be kind of a little bit of more of an overview of faculty from different areas, because one of the things that's clear is that the commercialization path, I think, in the life sciences and in medicine, I would argue is somewhat different, at least from a funding standpoint, from those who are in the physical sciences and engineering. So I tried to have this one to be a little bit more of a broader brush, and then in subsequent panels we might have something more specific. So if I can, why don't we start with Umut? If you could just talk a little bit about your intro. We'll get into more specifics about the specific technology, but your just brief intro.
Sure. Hi everybody. Thanks for having me here today. I'm an associate professor in the Case School of Engineering. I have been here at Case for almost 8 years now. And so far, based on the technologies that we have developed over the years, 4 companies were formed. We just started the 4th company recently. I hold 9 US patents and a number of international patent applications and US patent applications in the process. And my students, the members of my lab are also involved actively in the invention process. They become inventors in the patents that we submit, in addition to all the publications that we have. I was elected as a senior member of the National Academy of Inventors this past year. So we are quite dedicated and we are quite involved with inventing new technologies and seeing them through their translation and commercialization.
Thank you, Umut. Reshmi, can I go to you next?
Hey, my name is Reshmi, and I'm an assistant professor in Department of Medicine, Division of Hematology Oncology. And my lab is focusing on cancer immunotherapy. So we are developing new tools for therapy or treating cancer patients, both adults and pediatrics. But we are mostly focused on hematopoietic cancers. So yeah, about commercialization, I would say I'm just a beginner. I have only one experience so far, which is a product licensing. Probably we'll talk later. I guess this is just an introduction. So yeah, that's what we are doing.
Great, thank you, Reshmi. And I'll go to is that Pavarotti in the background or Bob Brown? I'll go to Bob Brown.
Nessun dorma.
You can sing for us. Normally people ask me, I'm a lot of people call me Al Green, so normally people tell me to sing. So we'll tell you to sing, Bob.
No, then I think you're going to lose your audience. Anyway, so oh gosh, I have so many things to say. Let me just try to summarize it. The interesting thing, I think, that if I've got people, I'm trying to tell you a story about a person who's been at the university for 50 years. And during that time, so many things happened that were very surprising, but there are a different number of lessons that I think are of value for anybody who's thinking about how in the world would they ever get involved with a company? How would they get involved? and to stay at the university. So, okay, started off 10 years building up muscle in particle physics. And the interesting thing is, at that time, of course, I didn't imagine that I'd ever be where I am right now. But the point is that if you just commit yourself to doing something very well as you can, build up the muscles for it, build up the critical thinking for it, it can be adaptable to things. And oh my gosh, 10 years after I was here, former students, and I might as well quickly say, the two most important words in my professional life are former students, and they are the people that made it possible for me to be an entrepreneur, but to stay at the university. But anyway, I started working with some of my former students in industry. And from there, we got into inventions, just, patenting. By the way, very recently, we've had a couple of awards from the US Patent Office for things that we've done. And the whole story about the innovation that went in, the recruitment of people when it looked like companies were there. I've gotten involved with 7 now startups, and then just the different problems that have come up in a startup company. I just love to talk about all of those things, and I'm going to stop now to see how I can fit those lessons into what people are saying and what people want to hear.
For sure. We'll definitely get back to, hopefully we'll be able to cover all those topics as they come up during the Q&A. So folks, so we're going to jump into a little bit more of a deeper dive of each of the individual faculty here. And I want to be really encouraging questions. The idea here is the more questions and the more dialogue we can have with the community of participants here, I think that's really what would be successful. So Umut, I'm going to spin it back to you. And if I could say a couple words about Umut, when I first started working with CASE, I didn't know you, Umut, but what came to me, what you were described as, quote unquote, a rock star. Okay, so I'll put that out there. So I was so delighted to speak with the resident rock star. But, you and I had several conversations. We've had different experiences in technology commercialization for sure. But one of the things that really impressed me, honestly speaking, about your experiences was, one, it was a very broad reaching and overlapping area, from devices and engineering, which I'm much more familiar with, to certainly medical and medical devices and so on. And the diligence that you pursued this, I think is useful for folks on this in the group to hear. And so, if you could take some time, I know you have a chart you can put up, but you could take some time in talking about, the kinds of things that you've commercialized and some of the obstacles and where you look for funding and so on. And we'll try to monitor the questions and go forward. So please, Umut, take it.
Yeah, sure. So I'm here at CASE. I'm leading the CASE Biomanufacturing and Microfabrication Laboratory. And most of our efforts are in devising or developing solutions, micro-engineered solutions to medical problems. So, and manufacturing fabrication is always at the back of our minds. So my primary appointment is in the mechanical engineering department. So mechanical engineers are the ones who worry about how to manufacture things, how to make things. So we always have that in our, at the back of our minds. And I also try to basically provide this insight to the students as well. So if before we design something or before we start tackling an issue, can it be made in a realistic way, or can it be made in scale, is one of the things that we always think about. If a design is complex or if a solution is complex, that's almost never a good solution for us. So we want simple, makeable, manufacturable things that address the problem or the issue with the least effort in making them, and also cost effectiveness is another issue. So, and when I, for example, one of the things that I try to do is when I talk with when I give a talk, or when I talk with students or other experts, physicians, with you, for example, I try not to go into the details of the technology. That's what I also always try to do with Al, and he told me the same thing based on his earlier experience. So technology is never at the forefront of translation or commercialization. It doesn't actually, in many cases, it doesn't really matter how the technology works, what it does, what are the details, or how much work went into coming up with that technology or that process or that design. So it doesn't matter. We don't talk about it. When I give a talk, when I give an engineering talk, you would hear me. Maybe I would have one slide on how the technology works. The rest of my talk would be on, for example, the problem or the unmet need, or is it a real problem? If you don't solve this problem, then what is the alternative, right? And what happens if you don't solve this problem? What do people think about this problem and the solution that you are offering, and the invention, and how we make the first prototype, for example, how we tested it, how we put it into use. So these are the type of things that are quite important. And when you also engage with, for example, translation research funding opportunities or agencies in the translation commercialization space, they always trust that you will make the technology work. But typically the question is, who is going to pay for this? Is it really needed? Are you really addressing a real problem or a real unmet need? So this is the type of training that I try to provide to the students, and I actually agree with Professor Bob Brown in that the reason why we continue doing this is actually being able to educate the next generation of inventors, and seeing students basically pick up some of these key skills and abilities and become inventors of their own, or maybe, for example, get involved with a company and basically take it to the next level. So this is kind of an overview of how we approach things. And as Al said, I would like to I prepared a cheat sheet for me so that I don't forget everything that I want to say. Maybe I can just share the screen with you here. So this is let me see if it is working here. So let me try.
Yeah, it's on.
You can see it? Okay.
Yeah, yes.
So this cheat sheet is actually the kind of the pathway that we typically consider in the medical technology innovation and commercialization path. Typically we start with the discovery, and I always try to encourage the students to make sure that they read the literature, they know what is published, what is out there in the patent databases, as well as in the publications, including our own publications. So students are expected to read at least our publications in a specific area, and as well as the broader literature is expected. Talking to people is key. I actually realized that in many cases, academics, many faculty, they think that they know the best, and they don't really like talking to people or consulting people in certain regards. But it's key talking to everyone, at different levels, different institutions, different places. If it is a medical innovation or medical solution that you are trying to address, it's key to talk to physicians, doctors, nurses, and the people who will actually use them, for example. And keeping an open mind and not trying to sell your idea or technology, but trying to understand what the real unmet need is. And in many cases, these conversations doesn't even involve the type of technology that you have or the details of the technology. It's much more important to understand that unmet need. And then the invention actually comes afterwards. After you understand what's out there, what are the previous solutions maybe that failed, what are other people's approaches to the same problem, and what do the people think the unmet need is. After you understand these things, I can tell you that a good engineer, a well-trained engineer, can invent a solution for a problem if the problem is well described. So invention is actually not the big deal here. You can invent something based on what is already known, what is based on the scientific foundations that we have. Invention is not the key thing here. The more important thing is understanding the problem, making sure that you are working on a real problem. You are not working on a made-up problem that you think is important. Other people should also think that it's important. The invention can be done in a strategic way by looking at the existing patents, existing literature, and you can come up with claims, you can come up with your details of your design in a really strategic way, so that your research project, once, if it is successful, if your whatever technology or solution that you are working on is successful, it will automatically be patentable. It's not good to invent something and then go check the literature or check the patent database. You can actually make slight modifications to your approach to make it patentable, to go around other patents or other failed solutions, for example. One of the key things that we focus on is prototyping and making sure that making it and prototyping the solution as early as possible. And this actually, again, taps into our experience in manufacturing, microfabrication, fabrication, and so on. So we want to make a prototype as early as possible, and we want that prototype to fail as early and as much as possible. So we want to see failures, what is not working and why, what are the reasons for it not to work. We want to understand these things. And if you can actually do this, and these are all actually required translation, research funding, and so on. But if you can actually use manufacturing processes that can maybe in the future allow scale up, or that would be as close as possible to the type of manufacturing that you would use, for example, injection molding in the case of a plastic part. And if you can also use materials that are regulatory approved, for example, if it is a medical device, some type of medical device, and if you are using FDA approved or FDA grade plastics, that would again bring things closer to commercialization and translation. And then comes the testing and regulatory and reimbursement consideration. So it looks like a big chart and lots of things to think about. But the more you can actually take these into consideration when you invent or when you design something or when you work on a research problem, the easier it will be to translate and commercialize. Some of these activities can take place in the university. Depending on when the licensing happens, some of these activities can also be taken on by the company or the startup company. But this is based on our experience. These are the main items that we work on. I hope it wasn't a long.
No, that's very good. And so if I can, oh yeah, I'm off mute. So just a couple comments, and I want to hand it to Reshmi next to say. So when I look at this list, I think it is really a good synopsis of the translation process. And there are several different ways to matrix this, but I like the way this is laid out. The comment I would make is that what I often see, in fact, most of the time, what you see, in particular in the physical sciences, what you see is it starts in there's number one, discovery, then they skip 2 and they go to 3, invention, prototype, testing, have technology, will travel. Now let me find a customer. Then they go to customer discovery. And that's typically the path that people take because they're so enamored with what their invention is, and they prototype it and they test it and it works and woohoo, that's great. Now what? And I think that's good. When we come back to you, Umut, what I would like to talk about later, if there's time, is where you have looked for funding for these various set of activities. So, but I'm going to switch to Reshmi, if I could can get you to go through, and I'll just give 2 seconds about what about our conversation. When we talked before, I was stunned and so excited to hear the process that you went through, and the description I used was I said this is an example of when you have a fairly mature ecosystem, how it can really work. And the cases that you described was a great example. So Reshmi, can you walk us through a little bit of what you did and and so on?
Yeah, sure. So I don't have a vast experience like Umut, but I recently, we licensed one of the cell therapy product from my lab. And I heard that cell therapy licensing is probably a little bit easier than other products, and the timelines are a little bit different from other products. So in my lab, we generated this cell therapy product. As Umut said, we don't have to go deep into the science, but let me tell you in 2 sentences what it is. So we are basically taking blood from patients, taking out the immune cells from blood and giving them some specificity to kill cancer cells. So we are telling those cells to kill cancer cells, but not to kill any normal cells. So this is very attractive to begin with. And once I had some preliminary data, we filed an invention disclosure form. And in a couple months, actually 2 people really helped me. Daria, who is a translational research officer from Case Western, and Deborah, who is again a cell therapy consultant of Case Western. So these 2 ladies really helped me. So they were kind of presenting my work in meetings where all these companies come as audience. I actually, and myself, I gave talk in many places like UH and Cleveland Clinic, and I got calls from big companies as well, like Kite or Miltony, showing interest in the product. But then some startup companies also came showing interest. So the first company I met, the CEO and president of the company asked me, can we come over there to your lab and have a conversation? I said, yes. So they came in probably in February, and we had this conversation, and I presented my work. And within 6 months, we got it licensed. So that was how easy it was. And there was no major challenges I faced. So I'm not the right example to ask about challenges because I didn't face much. It was all a smooth road for me. So actually, I must say the support system I had is the tech transfer office. They really helped me to navigate me through the process. And like I said, the 2 ladies I had, the cell therapy consultant and translational research officer, both of them really helped me to, actually took my hand and walked through the road. So they really helped me in this process. Everything, the licensing happened within 6 months. And right now we are in the process of the IND, writing the package to FDA, and soon the clinical trial we are expecting to start in UH, University Hospitals here in Cleveland. And one thing I think why it might have happened that quick and that easily might be for cell therapy people, maybe this is a good information that we have here in-house in the Woolstein Research Building of Case Western. We have a facility to expand clinically grade cells. So in-house, we can expand those cells, clinical grade, to give to patients. And especially for my product, from university hospitals, clinicians showed interest to start clinical trials. So the system was set. So probably that was an attraction too. So it happened, yeah.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about, starting from, you were interested in cell therapy, and so you got funding from where, yeah. Okay, and then you mentioned, well, you had these consultants. Well, who paid for those consultants? I mean, and so where did the funding come from? Did you apply to it? How did you find out about it? And those sorts of things. I think that'd be useful for the participants to hear.
Yeah, sure. Certainly, I did not pay for them, and I believe the tech transfer office paid for them, or Case Western paid for them. I did not pay for them, but I got their contacts through tech transfer. So they connected me to these people. I really don't know who paid for them.
So these were probably in residence, and maybe you can help, Michael, also. I mean, were these folks that are sort of entrepreneurs in residence that were in the ecosystem that stepped up when they heard about this? I mean, this is, again, an example of a more mature ecosystem, or maybe Todd can speak to that, or anyone, of how they were covered and how they heard about this and how they got in contact with Reshmi, et cetera.
Yeah, I think, Todd, there's a couple flavors that I think came to bear here. And it's actually a nice predicate for what we're trying to do through Veale. But one is Daria. Daria is basically a translational officer in the School of Medicine. Her job is to scout. So spend time with Reshmi and other folks that are coming up with really innovative research, and to help surface those opportunities and then help usher them through to try and find licensing partners, work closely with TTO. But similar to kind of the rollout that we've been lucky enough to have used play as well is really just scouting for technologies that have commercial potential. So Daria was busy in sort of identifying the opportunity. And then Deborah is another example of an EIR that we brought on. She spent about 6 months at Case looking at our entire portfolio of oncology assets and trying to identify, similar to Dara, one or two that had real clinical and commercial potential. So Deb had a couple different outcomes. One, she was able to connect Reshmi's work with the partner. It's a company she had been working with. And two, she actually explored potentially starting a separate company with another technology out of Case. So she's a great example of two different approaches with an entrepreneur in residence. Or
you are muted.
Yeah. So
trying to take technology from Case here and it's a commercialization.
Yeah, no, that it's a really good example. Now, but from your side, Reshmi, I mean, so okay, you had these resources, and that had been established and being built by the School of Medicine, as Todd described, with these entrepreneurs and residents who were already looking and finding and so on and so forth. What about your time? I mean, how did you cover yourself during this translational period?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to get an award from St. Baldrick's Foundation, which is a pediatric cancer research foundation. Actually, they covered all my first 5 years of salary as a junior faculty. So I was lucky that way, getting my salary covered from that foundation grant.
Okay.
Yeah. And for the work itself, the first support I got from Case Comprehensive Cancer Center, I got a pilot award. They give pilot awards for innovation ideas. So if you have a product like this, or if you have ideas, you can pitch in and get some fund from Cancer Center. So I got that and started like that. Then when I had some data, I also got fund from CTP, which is Case Western, I think, Technology and Validation Program. So I got funded from that as well. So actually those two fundings helped me to build up my preliminary data. And once the product was licensed, actually we applied for the SBIR, but the company applied and I'm also a PI. So I'll be a subcontract PI. So if it gets awarded, some money comes to Case Western. And also I have a sponsored research agreement with them. So because it actually got licensed in a pretty early phase, there are so much we can do.
Sure.
And now that is covered as a sponsored research agreement with the industry.
Okay, that's great. And now, and the last question on this round before we go to Bob. So did you have, I'll use the word hand-holding. I mean, most faculty, and relatively junior faculty don't know, okay, well, I'll look here or I'll look there. Did you have mentors that kind of said, well, okay, look to this area to get funding for this? I mean, you had your initial 5 years, but how did that work? I mean, how did you learn about these buckets of funding for the different translational phases you were going through?
Yeah, so in Cancer Center here, we have some kind of close meetings going on where you can discuss. So I know who all faculties kind of licensed their products or started their companies. So I know them. So personally, I go to their office and talk with them. But frankly, these CTP and I got another counter award from Case. Both of them came from Tech Transfer Office.
Okay, so Tech Transfer Office was really helpful in pointing you to direction. No, that's really good to know. That's, again, an example of an ecosystem that we would like to build throughout the university in not just in School of Medicine, but in engineering and the physical sciences and so on. So that's great. We'll come back and talk about this more. So going to Bob, I'll tell a little bit of story. So with Bob, one of your star students, of course, Hiro Fujita, who was a part of QED, was the CEO of QED. So when I first came to Ohio, when I was just starting to run Kent Displays, I met Hiro through a mutual acquaintance. We were both running companies and trying to grow them. And for the physicists in the room, I'm a physicist, and of course, Heroes in your company was called QED. And if you're a physicist, that means quantum electrodynamics. And so I said, this guy's got to be a particle physicist. And so that was I had to know that he must have been a particle physicist based on the name of the company. But Bob, you have a long history of these kinds of activities. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to hear your words on this panel is because I think there's some unique challenges associated with commercialization and translation in the physical sciences, because more often than not, you don't have scenarios where you're solving a specific problem. You're generally developing a technology. And so you're a hammer looking for a nail. And that's what when Umut's chart we put up, I mean, you end up with the reverse problem, great technology. Now, what do I go and solve? So I would love to hear your experiences, where you looked, how it worked, and just your general insight on the matter. So handing it to you, Bob.
Oh, thanks, Al. You know, I didn't think I was going to do this, but now that I saw, you know, the great stuff that Umut said and Reshmi said, I'm going to share.
Good. We'd love it.
I think you'll like it because you'll see some words in there that I may not touch upon, and it might stimulate a question.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bob.
Let me try to share this. And I think that this is the guy that'll come up.
There we go. We can see it. We're good.
Yeah, but I can't. Just a second. Okay, so you guys can see this now.
Correct. Yes.
Good. All right.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm going to fit in nicely with Umut and Reshmi here. I was thinking about 3 different stages, you know, and I've got stuff here that just, it seems to me, fills in some things.
Wow. Yeah, this is pretty good insight.
So here I got 3 stages. It's my experience. This isn't a general polling of entrepreneurship. This is my experience at Case Western Reserve University. Some specific things happening, but nevertheless, I wish I knew this stuff, and I want to tell all the faculty and staff and everybody that they can do a lot. It's just amazing what you can do, and I never imagined it would happen. Anyway, I've got 3 stages. I've got an innovation thing that I wanted to tell you about. I want to talk about getting money and recruiting people, and I wanted to talk to you about some problems, some real problems. Well,
okay, great.
Back to this. How did we ever do anything? How did we ever start thinking about companies and you know, having some kind of commercialization? Well, there were 3 things that just jumped out at me as I was thinking about what I wanted to say and talk with you about. Number 1, what happened, and I see it happening over and over again, it isn't so peculiar. There can be a unique vendor bought out by an OEM, and all of a sudden there's an underserved market. All of a sudden, you know, there's something where nobody else can get anything from that vendor because this OEM has got it all tied up. And what this often all comes about is my connections with former students. And of course, this part was, this is part of Hiro Fujita's story. You know, and you had to be light on your feet because the OEMs, you know, when you've got $1 billion, many billions of dollars of market, you can't, for some reason or another, it's like when IBM couldn't really do Microsoft. You can't seem to really handle the $100 million markets very well.
Right.
It's really, so there are things happening here that I see over and over again, and they are opportunities for you and your students. Look, we were working partnership with a lot of companies with my former students that came back to me and wanted me to work with them. Immediately, there were all kinds of problems. An example of a problem that came up was the helium shortage in the world today. And there was a problem brought up, you know, by actually, and this is actually in medical school, and Umut has a major role in this. There was a malaria detection problem. And then, of course, there's just simply an invention that you have. You realize that MR-guided radiotherapy could reduce adding extra radiation to the radiotherapy that, you know, compounds things. And of course, that's a wonderful story by Veale. And my role in all of these three different things were made possible because of my expertise that I gained and I developed as a university faculty member. Well, then once you got started doing some things, you needed a partnership, you needed a team, you needed to raise money. So in the, you know, the university is rich in talent with all of your students. And so, you know, that's what you want to think about as a faculty member. All of your students are your students forever. They're your former students. And oh my gosh, you know, you can imagine after all my years, I've got so many I got such a network. Oh, wow. You couldn't believe. Well, anyway, you know, there's all the seeding, there's the Case Coulter, there's Nord Foundation. These are all things that we're very much involved in right now with our latest venture, which is a COVID detector. And I would love to talk with you about that. But anyway, thanks to Weatherhead, thanks to what Veale's doing now, there's just all kinds of business competitions for seeding money, the foundations for seeding money. But you know what? You know where we got money that was really, really helpful for us? This was, you know, some years ago, but still. We were working with industry. We were helping them solve problems. They were giving us funding. Well, they gave us much more funding than we needed to live on. And that helped us expand and think and do other things and work on other projects. You know, we're not people who need a lot of money in a certain sense, if you know what I mean. Well, then another thing that has happened very importantly and just very recently is that industry itself is a great network. We just recently located a manufacturing company for our COVID invention. And so, you know, all of this came through our industrial context and just keeps growing. Former students on the team, oh, I told you about the two most important words. You know, my present students are not far behind in how important they are to work with us in all of the things that we're doing. Well, I got to quickly mention our entrepreneurial master's program, 20 years old, PEP STEP, you know, physics entrepreneurial program, and now it's, you know, science and technology engineering program. It's entrepreneurship. It is a wonderful thing, and many students from there have actually been involved with us in different aspects, helping us with SBIRs, which is another very important way we get money. And just, one of them actually helped me write my first business plan. You know, that was a major thing. So all of these things you can get help. You don't have to go to, you know, take the classes yourself. You can work with a partnership of students particularly, and of course the wonderful faculty, Weatherhead, to work out the kinds of things, the accounting questions that you need. And that really is a major thing about being here in the university. Well, here's my fun part, although in some ways it's also a painful part. The commitment to a startup company, I always tell people that in general, you ain't going to stay at the university and start up a company. You have to have some partnership, because if you want to stay at the university, somebody's got to go out there and work 100 hours a week. Someone's got to be there. And of course, that's where you have, you know, if you can get a great team together and get people to go out and really be the leader. You know, Hiro Fujita was the brains and the brawn of that particular wonderful aspect of our entrepreneurial life at Quality Electrodynamics. And anyway, then there's something else I got to tell you. If you're going to start a company, you're going to decide shares. let me tell you, that decision made at the beginning better be made carefully. I have so many painful stories I could share with you about, things that went awry because somebody got a big share and then left. Oh, wow. I mean, it's just a major thing. And I have to tell you, it's so important. Well, you can't stop improving your product. You got to keep looking over your shoulder. Somebody might be gaining on you. And you got to realize that tomorrow somebody can blow you out of the water when you're doing anything. You're never done reevaluating, reiterating part of your it's part of your research that's going on. And then of course, well, regulatory compliance in our particular medical world is this is where we got quality electrodynamics from. That's a big deal. FDA can come in and shut you down tomorrow, and not always for good reasons. My little magnet here was just to remind me to say I'm so grateful to Veale for this panel and for what they've been putting together, and I really enjoyed the magnet description this morning.
Great. Well, thanks, Bob. So let me, what I'd love to hear is some feedback from the group. If you could unshare the screen, Bob, or maybe Doug can give us back the screen. So it would be good to hear just questions and comments. I honestly have to say, I wish we had an additional 45 minutes because I would like to talk more about where these sources of funding are, but I'll come to that in the very end before I hand it back to Michael. But can we get some questions from the audience here? Let's see if if there are hands up or anything like that. Or okay, great, Vincent.
Yeah, a question for Robert. So basically, you're saying you start up the company in your laboratory, you develop the entire logistic of it, but at what point do you work with the university, the tech transfer office, and how does that work practically?
So in our most recent example of our COVID detector, it really started with a patent invention disclosure.
Right.
We needed to have that in place to go forward. And it's true that for the most part, I'm sitting in my office during that whole time, except the partnership that I talked about. We grew this. We had people in the School of Medicine, people in engineering, and all of us working together, developing a patent, working on, well, most recently trying to get funding to go, well, we first applied and got a Nord Foundation grant. That was great because then that helped us to go to the next step. And the next step is an SBIR and NIH. And then...
But one question, if you cannot get SBIR money, my understanding already.
I'm sorry, I jumped past, I've got all these things are so ingrained in my mind. We have another company that we've put together in the last couple of years. And with this company was designed exactly for this general approach that we've got for detecting disease components. And that was absolutely another critical part of the whole story that we're beginning to tell.
Can you say something about the establishment of partnership in terms of shares, and how do you negotiate with the university? How many shares will go to your company? How do you negotiate with your own collaborators? All these aspects that end up being more important than you initially brushed over them.
Right. Oh, well, absolutely. So for example, with our invention disclosure, God willing that, we go through and actually get a patent, half of it is owned by the university. And we're very happy to do that, because look at the overhead, look at us sitting in the university, look at the money that the university spends to carry out the patenting, and all of this. So that's the first part of your question, is that, as far as who owns it and what's got the patenting and so forth. Now, in terms of the company, now that works differently depending upon, for example, if we will go with our company to license our own patent, then the university, benefits that way, and so, and in fact, of course, the university in some situations owns part of the company. At the moment, that's not something that we've negotiated yet.
So my final question, both to you and Umut, do I understand that you develop the logistic of a company basically mostly on your own and whatever help you can get, and then you present this plan to the university and just discuss, basically the share, 50% share?
Let me let Umut say something about this, but let me just quickly tell you that in starting up this most recent company, this was just our own enterprise, and this was not done through any particular arm of the university. And the patenting is indeed something also sort of separate from the company, in the sense that we just want to make sure that we can get licensing of this invention if we are successful in going forward. But I'll let Umut talk.
Umut?
Yeah.
Sure. Yes. So based on our experience, the company leadership is extremely important. And as Bob Brown said, it is a full-time job. It's not a really good idea to be a CEO of a company as a faculty, or not have someone who is experienced in the leadership of the company. In our experience, the company was formed in coordination with the tech transfer office, because, again, based on my experience, all the companies that started from case had the company leadership had a connection to the case community. They either went to school here, for example, graduated many years ago, started companies, and sold their companies. Now they are actually looking at, for example, new entrepreneurship opportunities. And so in our case, the company was started, I think the short answer to the question is, it was in coordination with the tech transfer office. We interviewed options like potential CEOs, and and the CEO, the tech transfer office, and the inventors should be in agreement. You need to like each other, because once the company starts, you spend so much time meeting with them, working on things. You need to come to agreement in terms of shares, royalties, lots of things. You need to be working with people who can get along with. And in our case, it was a relatively long interview process, that until we identified the right CEO and until they identified us. It happens on both sides. They do due diligence on you and on the technology, and you should have your own type of due diligence on the candidate and on the people who's interested in licensing the technology. Does this answer the question?
Basically, what I understand now is that the university faculty has to do a lot of the logistics of setting up a company themselves.
So in my case, it wasn't the case. It wasn't like that. So I think maybe I was lucky to have people who had prior company experience. So they started the company. They did all the administrative work. They they did all the company side of things. I stayed on the research and on the technology on the academic side. So I didn't do the starting of the company actually in that case. I had such experiences before, for example, from my graduate school years, but they weren't successful. So when an academician starts the company without any business experience, this is my experience or my observation, it doesn't go anywhere. You really need real company people, experienced people who knows how to run companies, start companies, do the payroll, do all the accounting, lots of things involved there, right? So they should know how to communicate with investors, market research, lots of things.
So thanks so much. In the interest of time, I wish we had a lot more time. Just wanted to say one last thing, and then I want to hand it back to Michael. Stephanie, who's on the call, Stephanie Weidenbecker, had a very nice chart, which I think it would be great, Doug, if you could distribute. It's translational funding opportunities at CASE. Now, I want people to realize that there are also funding opportunities outside of CASE that are not tied to medicine and life sciences, and we got to really wrap our arms around that too. But if we could get that distributed, that would be great. Stephanie, if you want to add maybe 10 seconds real quick.
Yes, I kept wanting to jump in. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Stephanie Weidenbecker. I work in the tech transfer office here at CASE. And I wanted to just take a step back really quickly to answer Dr. Monier's question about how the university is involved or how much the faculty member is involved in starting a company. So from our perspective, it is very important that you involve the tech transfer office early. We do have some faculty members that come to us and say they've started their own company. It's usually in the form of, it's very basic, just a name. They maybe have talked to some entrepreneurs, but it really is helpful for us to be involved, make introductions to potential CEOs, and we can help you with that entire process. And in terms of the ownership of the company, so CASE will negotiate with the startup in a license or an option to license what the terms are, how much the university will own. And so it's not something that faculty members have to do on their own by any means. We help you get funding. There are a lot of things that we can get involved with. So it's always good to start early. And then to add to Al's, so I put together a list of funding opportunities. These are for faculty members before they start a company. I don't know, Doug, can you send them out as an email, or do you want me to share my screen just to?
I can send it out as an email. I also just put in the chat as well for people so they can reference.
Okay. So very quickly, it's probably 7 or 8 different translational funding grants on campus. These are very different from NIH grants because they can actually be used for some of the work that Reshmi described earlier, which is to pay for consultants, whether we find them on campus or outside of CASE. If, for example, you needed an FDA consultant, we can help with that. And these grants can pay for some of these translational milestones that are usually very hard to find funding for. And they're smaller amounts. They're only about $50,000 each. But if you take all of them together, once you apply for one, you have a very good chance of getting additional funding from some of the other grants. And they each have their own committees that review the proposals, and you get introduced to a number of different people from different backgrounds, industry experience, and in a lot of cases we've had some of these people become CEOs of our startup companies. So even if you feel that you're too early for some of these grants, it's always helpful to reach out. I put the contact names on there, or reach out to the tech transfer office and we can help you put together the proposals. And sometimes you have to go through 2 or 3 rounds before you get funded, but it gives you a lot of feedback and just positions your technology.
Thanks, Stephanie. Well, Michael, I'm going to hand it back to you. So hopefully from the robust discussion, what I would say is it would be great if we could do another one. Is I apologize that we've run a little bit over our time, but a great robust conversation. Handing it back to you, Michael, close us out and go forward.
No, great. You felt the same way. I mean, Al, thank you for pulling this together and for moderating. Bob, Umut, and Reshmi, thanks for sharing your experiences.